COMA. I've got a very good friend, Sergei. We've been friends since high school. Now he has moved to another city for work, but we still keep in touch and often discuss the same topic. A few years ago, Sergei got into a big trouble. He was in a bad accident with several cars. 2 people died in that accident, and my friend was about to become the third one. His condition was grave. He had to undergo complicated surgery several times. Then Sergei fell into a coma. I remember the panic we were all in. His mother crying. He was her only son. His fiancée, Nastya, walking along the hospital corridors as if she were a ghost, pale, confused. I was there all the time too, trying to do something to help, to calm down his mother and Nastya. We all had suffered in full, of course. Fortunately, Sergei finally regained consciousness. He stayed in a coma for just over a week. Then there was a long recovery. All this time, my friend was strange. It was like he wasn't himself. One night, I stayed to look after Sergei. His mother and fiancé were so exhausted, I decided to help them a little and let them go home to have some rest. That night, Sergei told me about what was happening to him all those days he had been in a coma. I'll tell it from his own words. I didn't know I was in a coma. I didn't know I was asleep. I didn't remember the accident. I still can't remember it very well. It was all a blur, like it hadn't happened to me. I just woke up in my bed, in my house. As usual, I got ready for work. It was about 7 a.m. The only thing that surprised me was that my mom wasn't home. She was supposed to be off that day. It wasn't her shift, but she wasn't there. I tried to call her, but all I could hear was static on the phone. So I decided there was something wrong with the network, so I put off the call for a while. I went outside, and it was suspiciously quiet. No cars, no people. From time to time, someone was passing by, though at that time of the day, everyone was usually hurrying to work, and buses were jammed. I didn't wait for my bus. I stood in the cold for a very long time. I was surprised. It was so cold. Though it was spring, why was it so cold? I walked to work, and all the time I was surprised how quiet it was around. I went to my office, and there was no one in. Empty. Not a soul. There were no clothes or bags by the front door, as if no one had ever come here. I called our secretary, Luda, but all I could hear on the phone was static again. There wasn't even a ringing tone. I didn't understand what was going on. I decided to leave. On my way, I was wondering what could have happened. The city had literally died out. The people I met occasionally looked so sad, their eyes downcast. Of course, silly apocalyptic thoughts popped into my head. I've just hooked on horror, I guess. But how could I have missed the end of the world, for that matter? It's just impossible not to notice. I turned to Nastya's house and decided to go in and talk to her to make sure I wasn't crazy. The door to her apartment was open, empty again inside. I mean, the furniture, the clothes, everything was there. But Nastya wasn't, and neither were her parents. I was completely embarrassed. What on earth was going on? Of course, I couldn't call anyone, because the phone made no other sound than a hiss. I don't know how long I had been walking like that around the half-empty streets before I felt panic set in. At some point, I just broke down and ran. I don't know where I was running to or why. Maybe just out of fear of the unknown. When I got home, I found that my mom still wasn't there. My last hope prompted me to go to my neighbor, Aunt Zina. Her son Kolya and I used to go to university together. Then he was killed, attacked in a neighbor's yard, robbed and beaten to death. Aunt Zina was black with grief. I often came to support her and offer some help. Now I hoped so much to see her home. The door to her apartment was open as well. I went in and listened. It sounded like someone was in the kitchen. Hooray! So I wasn't crazy after all. I ran into the kitchen and was shocked, speechless. I saw Kolya at the window. He was sitting there as if nothing had happened, alive and kicking. The words stuck in my throat. I stood there like a fool, looking at him without a word. Kolya smiled. "Why are you standing there like a lemon? Come in, sit down," he said. "Kolya, you were killed," I said, breathing a little. I know. Whatever done is done. Sit down." I sat down at the table. My head was all mixed up. I didn't know what to think. Kolya asked me about my life, about his mother, Aunt Zina, about some news, that sort of thing. I answered his questions, paralyzed with fear and disbelief. Then Kolya told me that I was dead, or nearly dead. That place was a kind of purgatory, and people's souls got stuck there. Sometimes they stayed there for years, and sometimes they spent no more than a week in that strange place. Kolya also said that I wouldn't feel hungry or thirsty, and in general, none of my human needs played a role any longer. I could only sleep, but even that was not necessary. I couldn't see my loved ones because they were alive and simply weren't there. He told me to be careful. He told me not to leave the apartment at night, because besides people like us, all kinds of freaks and scumbags inhabited that place. That even the fact of looking at them would be unpleasant. But Kolya promised that one day I would leave that place. It just had to be my time. The only thing he didn't know for sure was the place I would go to next. I was listening to my dead pal and felt my heart in my throat. Am I dead? But how? Everything was okay. I was fine. Kolya and I chatted for a long time, recollecting the old days. I even forgot myself for a while. But every time I realized where I was, I felt sick. I returned to my apartment when it was already dark outside. As I was walking up to my floor, I heard someone growling somewhere downstairs. I looked down the stairwell and saw something creepy in the moonlight. It didn't look human. Something ugly, hunched over, covered with some kind of bumps and sores, skewed, arms and legs literally sticking out in different directions. The stench of vomit, with a hint of booze, hit me sharply in the nose. I felt sick and covered my mouth with a hand. Something started coughing blood loudly. And then, that cough told me what it was, or rather who it was. When I was a kid, a homeless man, Uncle Vanya, lived in our entryway. They didn't kick him out into the street. Uncle Vanya drank himself to death. Then he got mixed up with drug addicts and finally disappeared for a long time. But half a year later, the bum was back. At that time, he looked really creepy, skinny, bruised. No one knew where he had vanished to and why he was back again. He was also coughing badly, awfully loud. Mom was afraid he might have tuberculosis. She asked the neighborhood officer to banish the marginalized man somehow. That's how Uncle Vanya ended up on the street. I was so angry with my mother at the time because she kicked the helpless man out. Well, I was a child and didn't understand much. Some time later, our ex-resident actually died of tuberculosis, not far from our house. And now, I thought I was looking at him. He was coughing up blood and sitting at the same place he'd always been when he was alive. I was creeped out by what I saw. I hurried to my apartment, and behind me, I heard foul language from the disfigured creature. addressed to me, obviously. He must have noticed me. I hurriedly slammed the door behind me. It was dark around me. I tried to turn on the light, but there was none. Nothing worked. Then I just went to bed, hoping that in the morning everything would be normal like before. All night long, someone had been crawling around in the entryway. Sometimes I heard coughing or growling. Someone kept wandering back and forth past the door, making inhuman noises. I got a chill from fear. In the morning, I woke up in the same place where I fell asleep. Nothing had changed, apart from the creepy noises behind the door. It was silent outside. I ventured out in the city again. Everything was still the same. I got desperate. I wanted to cry, to be honest. What should I do? Where to go? I had lived in that vacuum for a long time, wandering around the city, staring at the sad people passing by. The hope of getting out of there faded more and more. I lost track of time. It seemed like a month or more had passed. At some point, I got bored with everything. My soul was torn apart. I decided to stay in town for the night, not to hide in my apartment. I didn't care if I got torn apart by the freaks Kolya was talking about. I just wanted this nightmare to end as soon as possible. I was standing in the middle of the square, in total darkness. Some disgusting noises began to come from everywhere. I just stood there waiting for someone to come out and finish me. They appeared in the distance. They were closing in. Their gaunt arms and paws intertwined together. Some ugly bumps on their backs, all twisted in some way. Frog-like faces, almost no hair on their heads. Some greasy bits hanging down. It was horrible. Behind them, I saw there were others, not a bit better. Those things were crawling out of every nook and cranny. They used to be people. Some were still wearing their old clothes, tattered and dirty. Their faces were covered with warts, and their bodies were somehow irregular, asymmetrical. As they approached, the air filled with a sickening, poisonous smell, as if everything around me had rotted away. I began to vomit and fell to my knees. I was literally turned inside out. The creatures kept coming towards me, greedily stretching out their mangled limbs. The sounds they were making stabbed my ears, the whole place filled with those infernal symphonies. I was sure this was my end. At one point, when they were very close, I felt someone grab my arm abruptly and quickly pull me away. I recognized Kolya as my savior. He was literally dragging me along, cursing and accusing me of weakness. "Come on, Sergei, otherwise you'll become one of them. Let's get out of here while we can," he said. Soon we were sitting in my apartment. I was crying like a girl. I felt ashamed. Ashamed to be there, unable to do anything, ashamed to have let my friend down. I was just sitting there crying. Kolya sighed heavily. He said that I mustn't let these creatures take over my soul and that I had to be strong and patient. Not everyone can pass this test, the test of the emptiness around. This longing for home and for loved ones was eating me up inside. I wanted to scream. And behind the door I heard those awful noises again, as if some wild animals were roaming there. I wasn't scared anymore. I was completely exhausted. Then I thought a lot. I thought that I should not give up. Kolya had been there for more than 2 years and still hadn't lost hope. So how could I give up so easily? I was still ashamed of myself. Apparently, These creepy things had been following me and found the place where I lived. They started climbing up to my windows, trying to penetrate through my door. Every night I nailed it all down so they couldn't get in. I was scared out of my mind when everything around me was shaking because they wanted to get me by all means. In the morning, it would stop, but I always expected the night to come with indescribable terror. And then I began to get sick. My strength left me gradually with each passing day. I stopped feeling anything. I was no longer afraid. I locked myself in my apartment and sat there all day long. I didn't know how much time had passed. There were no mirrors around, but I think I looked lousy. I could see that my hands had turned completely white. I couldn't stand for long. I was literally falling down. Then there came a point when I just couldn't get out of bed. I was lying there wondering if it was going to be over soon. Either I would go somewhere else, or those things would get me out the night. Because now I couldn't defend my abode anymore. I was too weak. The freaks scratched at my door so diligently that I was sure that one day they would just erase it with their claws and get to me. Sometimes I heard them howling, mooing, and rattling the door and the windows all night long. It was horrible. After another hellish night, Kolya came to me at dawn. I don't know how he got in. Everything was tightly closed. He sat down next to me and took my hand. At that moment, I must have looked like a ghost. I couldn't even move. Kolya said that I would be leaving soon, because my mother and my beloved were praying a lot for me. He told me to come to his grave more often and to ask Aunt Zina to let him go. "What do you mean, let you go?" I asked. "Tell her to give away my things. My room is still the same as when I was alive, but it can't be this way. She must change everything, and she must let me go. She mustn't cry anymore. It's been a long time. I want her to be happy. She won't let me go. That's why I'm still here. But if it's over, I can be free. And then I'll go back to her. Tell her that," Kolya said. At that moment, I suddenly felt everything shrink inside me. It felt like I was about to be torn into 1,000 pieces. I started squirming, and I couldn't see anymore. The last thing I heard was Kolya saying goodbye to me. And then I woke up in my room. I died there, to wake up here. When I saw the doctors, I knew immediately that I had come home. I nearly jumped with joy, even though my head was still a real mess. Then I saw you, the people I live for. I instantly realized there was nothing more precious than my dearest. When you went home, the first day here, I cried. I had been crying for most of the night, not in pain, with happiness. I was insanely delighted it was all over. I'd been in a coma for about a week, and it felt like I'd been in that world for almost 6 months. Now I'm thinking everything over. I want to leave. I madly want to make everyone around me happy, because without them, my world is empty. Without them, there is no me. I don't want to tell my mother and Nasty about this all. At least not yet. I don't want to scare them. I don't know if they'll believe me. The doctors would probably say I was just delirious. But it all was real. It really happened. I think it all happened just to make me wake up, to come to my senses. I had always taken my family and friends for granted, even hurt them. Now things are going to change. 5 years have passed since then. I believe everything my friend told me. Sergei has never been a liar. And why would he lie? Moreover, there were some events later that proved his words. I know that Sergei went to Aunt Zina and told her everything. The woman cried and refused to believe him for a long time. But she did as she was told. In almost a year, her daughter, Kolya's sister, became pregnant. A boy was born, and he was named Dima. The baby looked remarkably like Kolya. The same face, the same habits and behavior. Aunt Zina noticed that at once. As the boy grew older, she saw more and more of her son's features in him. And so did everyone around. But not many people dared to talk about it out loud. This meant Kolya was back indeed, in Aunt Zina's grandson. For the first time in a long while, the woman felt really happy. She was sure that her son had returned to her, as if he had never left. Soon Sergei got married and moved into another city, got prompt at work. In a while his mother moved in too. I know for a fact they got on well, expecting a child, and I'm very happy for them. Sergei has changed. Now he really values what he has. And I think this new quality will never be taken away from him. He knows the value of life. And so do I now. Thank him a lot for that.